You guys, I can remember last year sometime I was all into the Micah Miller and the John Paul Miller case, that having to do with their situation, like they were going to get divorced. You know, I know you probably remember it. And she shot herself at a park. Very suspicious circumstances. To this day, myself, don't really fully believe that she killed herself. I know evidence proved that they're saying she did, but if you haven't listened to that story about Micah Miller in South Carolina, you do need to really watch that, or listen to that, because it's very interesting. But now we're getting into John Paul Miller and his dad, who have been, his dad's is Reginald Wayne Miller, and they both have been taken, you may have heard of this, been taken to court. Here's my baby, Nemo. They both been taken to court against some Jane Doe cases for, sorry about that, for some previous, evidently alleged, like, rapes. And these are Jane Doe's. There's two different cases. Jane Doe number 1, and this was at Myrtle Beach in 2023, alleges she encountered Miller, and he leaned over, he shoved his hands in her pants and touched her genitals. And according to the filing, that report, he then quoted scripture telling her, "No man was out without sin and temptation. God understands that." She said that moment triggered trauma of the assault years ago. So this happened evidently in 1988. It was allegedly. According to the February 5th, 2025 complaint, Jane Doe said that in 1988, and she was 15 years old, when John Paul Miller cornered her at her father's church on July 19th, 1988, John Paul rushed at Jane Doe number 1, forced her into an empty office, pushed her down a hall, dragged her into his truck, and raped her. These are allegations that are written in the lawsuit. So remember that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. So I'm explaining this, describing a moment that Jane Doe number 1 says would haunt her for the rest of her life. She buried the memory until 2023. The second Jane Doe is called The Piano Lesson. In March of 2025, another lawsuit was filed, this time by Jane Doe number 2. She alleges that in 1999, she was only 14 years old and was attending the Cathedral Hall Academy, a school run by Miller's father. John Paul invited her to stay after service. She says he sat beside her at the piano and began touching her under her clothing. When she reported this, she alleged she was punished. According to her lawsuit, she forced to write 5,000 times, "I will not lie about John Paul Miller." Like, that is crazy. I was like, it was just looked right over. This gets deeper and deeper into the more you hear about John Paul Miller and his family. I just find this is crazy. So there's also allegations of religious facade. Both Jane Doe lawsuits accuse the Millers of using their churches, the Cathedral Baptist, All Nations Cathedral, Solid Rock Ministries, as protected institutions. The complaints state that these organizations were not only ministries, but a calculated plan to groom victims and gaining the community's trust at the same time, and financial support. So along with this, the Millers, John Paul Miller and his dad, they counterclaimed. John Paul Miller was denied the allegations and responded by filing counterclaims against Jane Doe number 1 accusing her of defamation. Her attorneys fired back in August of 2025 with a memorandum asking the court to dismiss the claims. In their words, Defendant Miller fails to identify any particular allegedly defamatory statement, nor how such statements were published, nor how he was harmed. The counterclaim is vague and should not be valid. It also warned allowing his counterclaim to proceed would encourage abusers to re-weaponize the court against survivors for speaking out.
I feel like it was horrible. Whether I was awarded money or Sam was awarded money, I feel like the whole process is horrible. I think the saddest part of the entire trial, which will most likely be appealed, is that there were people in the audience who claimed to be Christians but show no likeness of Jesus whatsoever in any way.
If you're looking at the wider context, Micah Miller's death, these lawsuits surfaced on the shadow of tragedy. So in 2024, the death of Micah Miller, which was John Paul's wife. Like I said before, the authorities ruled her death as suicide, but the FBI later confirmed it carried out a court-authorized search at a property tied to Miller in November 24, but no criminal charges of her death have been filed. Still find it suspicious. I still think there's more to this story than has been found out. I was really on this story when it was out then, and I really feel like there's something with this guy that's not right, of course. If you haven't watched it, you need to watch and listen to that story, because he is guilty. I believe it. So with the trials, the current developments as of summer of 2025, here's where things stand. A jury recently ruled a separate civil trial awarding Miller for $100, while the former church member was awarded $3,400. Courts have already entered default judgment against his father, which is Reginald Wayne Miller, related to the cases. And despite these legal battles, John Paul has remarried. His new wife, Susie Skinner, is a widow, while her own husband's death has drawn queries too, because his death was suspicious. That is something else. Possibly I need to look into that next, but that's suspicious in a whole other way, with her husband dying too. The two Jane Does, the two lawsuits, have a long history of allegations against one pastor and his family's empire. So now we know this. At its heart, this case is not just one man. It's about power, I feel like. It's about control and grooming. I feel like that is part of what John Paul does, and uses the church behind him to support his activities, to support his actions. Protecting the predator is what it's doing, and not the victims. So behind their religious facade, they engaged in sexual abuse and predatory contact. And now the facade is starting to crack, and things are starting to come out. So I'm curious to find out what else comes out about John Paul Miller and his family, his dad, if anything else, but especially John Paul Miller. I can't wait to find out what happens with him. I hope you'll join me when I do find out more. I'll bring it back on for you guys to see. This has been Crime Diaries and Crime and Chaos Diaries with Nicole Grigg. You should look at the courtroom documents yourself if you want to. They're online for public display too. and hit like and subscribe and watch more of my videos. You guys have a great rest of the week. Stay safe.